The U.S. stock market just crashed by the widest margin in 6 months, and it all started with 17 little-known metals that most Americans have never heard of. While everyone was distracted by the latest political drama, China just played its trump card in the global economic chess game, and Donald Trump's response reveals just how vulnerable America really is.
They have done things over the last month that I think were really unthinkable. Nobody thought this could happen. With the historic agreement we've just signed, those prayers of millions have finally been answered. As you know, the hostages have been returned, and further work goes on having to do with the, sadly to say, bodies. Together we've achieved what everybody said was impossible. At long last, we have peace in the Middle East, and it's a very simple expression, peace in the Middle East, and we've heard it for many years, but nobody thought it could ever get there, and now we're there. I want to congratulate everybody sitting in these first few rows and standing behind me. I don't know why they chose to stand, but I promise I'll make it short, okay? We are not going to keep you standing for long. These are great leaders. After years of suffering and bloodshed, the war in Gaza is over. Humanitarian aid is now pouring in, including hundreds of truckloads of food, medical equipment, and other supplies, much of it paid for by people in this room. Civilians are returning to their homes. The hostages are reuniting. I mean, it's beautiful. I'm just watching it backstage. The level of love and sorrow, I've never seen anything like it. It's amazing when you see they haven't seen their mother, their father. They haven't seen them in such a long time, and they lived in a tunnel.
What we're witnessing isn't just another trade dispute. We're talking about rare earth minerals, the hidden backbone of every piece of technology you use, from your smartphone to the F-35 fighter jet. And China just reminded the world that it controls nearly 90% of the global supply. The question now becomes, why is this small group of metals suddenly threatening to bring down the world's largest economy? To understand the gravity of this situation, we need to go back to last Thursday, when Beijing dropped what can only be described as an economic nuclear bomb. China announced sweeping new export controls on rare earth minerals, not just the raw materials, but the entire supply chain, including extraction technology, refining processes, and manufacturing equipment. This wasn't just another trade spat announcement. This was China flexing the full extent of its rare earth monopoly. The timing was no coincidence. These restrictions came just weeks before a planned summit between Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, and they hit like a freight train. Within hours of the announcement, U.S. markets were in freefall. The S&P 500 plunged nearly 3%, the Nasdaq crashed more than 3.6%, and the Dow Jones lost almost 900 points. $2 trillion in market value vanished in a single trading session.
The outstanding work that the men and women of the FBI have been doing, and thanks to your brave leadership and the mandate you were given by the American people not only defend the homeland but crush violent crime, you tasked us with our great partners at the Department of Justice and the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General to start making arrests and bring prosecutions and safeguard our cities. And you said it, this is just the beginning. In just 7 months, I hope the media takes a look at every one of these charts, because these are the best numbers for fighting crime in U.S. history, and it's only 7 months in. And to do that, our vehicle to do it of choice was Operation Summer Heat, which the FBI architected to go after violent criminals. And in just a 3-month span, you had 8,700 arrests of violent criminals. You had 2,200 firearms seized off the streets permanently to safeguard our communities. You had 421 kilograms of fentanyl seized. Just to put that in perspective, that's enough to kill 55 million Americans alone. You had 45,000 kilograms of cocaine seized, and thanks to our Department of Justice partners, you had 2,100 indictments in 3 months, from June to September alone. Mr. President, that in and of itself would be historic for a 4-year presidency. You did that in 7 months because you let good cops be cops, and you partnered us with the right people at the Department of Justice to put the handcuffs on and bring them to court and put them in prison. And if that weren't enough, when you look at the year, for the entire 7-month period that we're talking about here, if you look at the past 4 years of the Biden administration, 16,000, 17,000, 15,000, 15,000. That's the number of arrests year over year of violent felons in this country for the Biden administration. Mr. President, In 7 months, you have 28,600 arrests of violent criminals in just 7 months.
The market devastation we're seeing goes far beyond typical volatility. But here's what makes this story truly shocking. Trump's immediate response revealed just how cornered America really is. Instead of projecting strength, the president went straight to panic mode. Within 24 hours, he was threatening China with a massive 100% tariff on all Chinese goods, effectively doubling the cost of everything from electronics to household items for American consumers. Think about that for a moment. The man who built his political brand on being the ultimate dealmaker was essentially throwing an economic tantrum because China reminded him who really holds the cards. The rare earth crisis exposes a fundamental weakness in America's economic foundation that goes far deeper than most people realize. These 17 chemical elements, with names like dysprosium, gadolinium, and terbium, are absolutely critical for modern technology. They're in your car's electric motor, your computer's hard drive, your smartphone's speaker, and America's most advanced weapon systems. The F-35 fighter jet needs rare earth magnets. Tomahawk cruise missiles require these materials. Even the latest artificial intelligence chips depend on rare earth processing. China doesn't just mine these materials, it has systematically built a stranglehold on the entire supply chain. While the United States once led rare earth production, decades of offshoring and cost-cutting allowed China to corner the market through strategic investment and, frankly, willingness to accept environmental costs that other countries wouldn't tolerate. Today, China controls about 70% of global rare earth mining and a staggering 90% of rare earth processing and magnet manufacturing. This gives Beijing unprecedented leverage over the global economy. As one former White House advisor put it, China's rare earth controls can forbid any country on earth from participating in the modern economy. That's not hyperbole, it's the reality of how dependent the world has become on Chinese rare earth supply chains. The new Chinese restrictions are particularly devastating because they target not just raw materials, but the technology and know-how needed to process them. Companies now need Chinese government approval to export any product containing more than 0.1% rare earth sourced from China or manufactured using Chinese extraction and refining technology. Since most global rare earth processing happens in China, this effectively gives Beijing veto power over vast swaths of the global technology sector. For the U.S. defense industry, the implications are catastrophic. The restrictions specifically prohibit rare earth exports for military use, meaning American defense contractors could soon face severe supply shortages. When we look at companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing suddenly find themselves at the mercy of Chinese export licenses, the vulnerability becomes crystal clear.
Join the Abraham Accord. I like to say the Avraham. I love Avraham, but somehow it doesn't sound as good when I say it as it does when some of my other friends say it who are from the region. But we're going to get a lot of people joining the Abraham Accords. We have the four great nations that did it early on, and they stayed with it. And then you had the Biden administration, which is the worst administration in the history of our country, and obviously they did nothing on that and anything else. And so it stayed at four, and now a lot of people, even today, they're talking about all joining up. So many people have talked to me about that, and it's going to be a great tribute to really the United States. I mean, the United States has worked very hard in the Middle East, so it would be a tribute to us and to Jared and to Steve and to all of the people, Marco, all of the people that have worked so hard on that. And it really is going to it's going to guarantee that it all stays together. You're going to do well, because the four nations do very well. I mean, they do extremely, as they're wealthy, but they're a lot wealthier because of it. So I hope everybody's now joining up. Now we have no excuses. We don't have a Gaza, and we don't have an Iran as an excuse. That was a good excuse, but we don't have that anymore. All the momentum now is toward a great, glorious, and lasting peace, and our commitment to fulfilling the 20-point.
These are the backbone of America's military-industrial complex, and they're now dependent on Beijing's goodwill. The semiconductor industry faces similar devastation. Intel, NVIDIA, AMD, the companies driving America's artificial intelligence boom, all depend on rare earth materials for chip manufacturing. Tesla and other electric vehicle manufacturers need rare earth magnets for their motors. Apple needs these materials for virtually every product it makes. But Trump's response to this crisis reveals something even more concerning than America's rare earth dependence. It shows how desperate and reactive U.S. policy has become. Rather than addressing the fundamental strategic vulnerability, Trump immediately resorted to his go-to solution: tariffs. The problem is that tariffs won't magically create a domestic rare earth supply chain. If anything, they'll make the problem worse by increasing costs for American companies, while doing nothing to reduce dependence on Chinese materials. The rare earth crisis also highlights Trump's broader approach to economic security, which seems to involve government takeovers of private companies rather than genuine market-based solutions. Just days after China's announcement, news broke that the Trump administration had taken a 10% stake in Canadian mining company Trilogy Metals, with warrants to purchase an additional 7.5%. The $35.6 million investment came alongside approval for the controversial Ambler Road project in Alaska, which the Biden administration had previously rejected due to environmental concerns. This wasn't Trump's first foray into what critics are calling crony capitalism or even socialism. The administration has now taken equity stakes in at least 5 companies: Intel, MP Materials, Lithium Americas, and now Trilogy Metals. Each deal has involved highly favorable terms that would be impossible for private investors to obtain, including board seats, leverage restrictions, and virtually free warrants. The Trilogy Metals deal is particularly revealing because it shows how Trump's approach to supply chain security actually creates new vulnerabilities. By taking government stakes in individual companies, the administration is picking winners and losers rather than creating competitive markets. The deal also raised immediate ethical concerns, particularly because billionaire Trump donor John Paulson reportedly has a significant stake in Trilogy Metals, meaning the government investment created a windfall for a major Trump supporter. International observers are watching this unfold with a mixture of concern and bewilderment. As one Canadian governance expert put it, "It is uncommon for a government to have a stake in a domestic company, but it's even more uncommon for a foreign government." The fact that the U.S. government is now directly owning pieces of Canadian mining companies represents a fundamental shift in how America approaches economic security. But the deeper problem isn't just Trump's response, it's that America allowed itself to become so vulnerable in the first place. The rare earth crisis is the result of decades of policy failures that prioritized short-term cost savings over long-term strategic security. American companies willingly handed over rare earth processing to China because it was cheaper without considering the national security implications. The consequences of this short-sightedness are now playing out in real time. U.S. automakers have already had to curtail production due to rare earth shortages, as China has leveraged supply constraints to see out or counter previous Trump tariffs. The new restrictions threaten to make these shortages much worse. China, for its part, is playing this crisis with strategic patience. Beijing's response to Trump's tariff threats has been measured and confident. Chinese officials have said they do not want a tariff war but are not afraid of one. They've defended the rare earth restrictions as legitimate national security measures, using the same justification that the U.S. has used for its own export controls on semiconductor technology. This creates a dangerous dynamic where both sides are escalating trade restrictions while claiming to act defensively. China can point to U.S. semiconductor export controls and port fees on Chinese ships as evidence of American aggression. The U.S. can point to Chinese rare earth restrictions as a proof of Beijing's economic coercion. Both sides are probably right, which makes resolution even more difficult. The market reaction to this crisis has been telling. After the initial panic, stocks have somewhat recovered as investors bet that Trump will ultimately back down from his most aggressive eats. This pattern, where Trump makes dramatic announcements that send markets tumbling, only to moderate his position when faced with economic consequences, has played out repeatedly during his presidency. But this time might be different. The rare earth crisis hits at the core of America's technological competitiveness and national security. Unlike previous trade disputes that focused mainly on traditional goods like steel or soybeans, this confrontation involves the fundamental building blocks of 21st century technology. The timing of China's move is also strategically brilliant. By announcing the restrictions just weeks before the planned Trump-Xi summit, Beijing has maximized its leverage while giving both sides a face-saving way to reach a deal. If Trump wants to avoid the economic damage of his threatened 100% tariffs, he'll need to offer China something significant in return for easing the rare earth restrictions. Early signs suggest that both sides are looking for an off-ramp. Despite his initial bluster, Trump has already begun moderating his tone, telling reporters that he has a great relationship with President Xi and that they'll get it set. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has suggested that the tariff deadline could be postponed depending on Beijing's actions. Chinese officials have indicated they're open to talks, but even if the immediate crisis is resolved, the underlying vulnerabilities remain. America's rare earth dependence won't disappear overnight, and China's leverage will only grow as global technology becomes more sophisticated. The artificial intelligence boom, the electric vehicle transition, and the expansion of renewable energy all require massive amounts of rare earth materials. Building a domestic rare earth supply chain would take years and require massive investment. It's not just about mining, it's about developing the entire processing infrastructure that China has spent decades perfecting. The environmental challenges are also significant as rare earth processing involves toxic chemicals and generates substantial waste. Some analysts see opportunity in this crisis. By forcing America to confront its rare earth dependence, China's restrictions could accelerate efforts to build alternative supply chains. Countries like Australia, Canada, and several African nations have significant rare earth reserves that could be developed. New processing facilities could be built in allied countries. The Trump administration's equity investments in mining companies could be part of this solution, though the approach raises its own concerns. By taking government stakes in private companies, the administration is essentially nationalizing parts of the mining sector, a move that would have been unthinkable for a Republican president just a few years ago. This shift toward state capitalism reflects the broader changes in global economic competition. As China has shown the effectiveness of state-directed investment in strategic sectors, other countries are being forced to adopt similar approaches. The result is a world where governments play increasingly direct roles in private markets, particularly in sectors deemed critical to national security. For American consumers, the rare earth crisis represents a preview of what economic decoupling from China might actually look like. If the current tensions escalate, Americans could face higher prices for everything from smartphones to cars. The 100% tariffs that Trump has threatened would essentially double the cost of Chinese goods, creating an inflation shock that would dwarf recent price increases. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond bilateral U.S.-China relations. Other countries are watching this confrontation and drawing their own conclusions about supply chain security. Japan and South Korea, both heavily dependent on Chinese rare earths, are accelerating their own efforts to diversify supply sources. European countries are considering their own strategic mineral reserves. The rare earth crisis also highlights the interconnected nature of modern economic warfare. China's restrictions on rare earth technology exports could impact not just American companies, but any company worldwide that uses Chinese rare earth processing technology. This creates pressure on third countries to choose sides in the U.S.-China economic competition. Looking ahead, the rare earth confrontation is likely to become a defining test of Trump's second-term economic strategy. His response will signal whether America is prepared to make the long-term investments needed to rebuild strategic supply chains, or whether it will continue to rely on short-term fixes like tariffs and government bailouts. The stakes couldn't be higher. Rare earth minerals aren't just important for current technology. They're essential for the future technologies that will determine global economic leadership. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced robotics, and next-generation renewable energy all depend on rare earth materials. The country that controls these supply chains will have enormous leverage over the global economy. China's rare earth gambit represents more than just another trade dispute. It's a demonstration of how economic interdependence can become economic vulnerability when one country achieves dominance over critical supply chains. The question now is whether America has the political will and strategic patience to address these vulnerabilities, or whether it will continue to lurch from crisis to crisis with increasingly desperate responses. The answer will determine not just the outcome of the current confrontation, but the broader trajectory of US-China competition and the future of the global economy. For now, China holds the cards, and Trump's panicked response suggests that Beijing's message has been received loud and clear. The age of American economic dominance may be ending, and it's happening, in 17 elements at a time.